The Thompsons were a family admired by all who knew them. Michael, 34, had climbed the corporate ladder to become a successful businessman, revered for his charm and wit. His wife, Emily, 32, was the epitome of grace and dedication, having chosen to stay at home to care for their two young children. They lived in an upscale neighborhood, surrounded by well-manicured lawns and friendly neighbors who often commented on how perfect their lives seemed. But behind the closed doors of their pristine home, the reality was far less idyllic. The Thompsons' marriage had once been filled with passion and excitement, but over the years, routine had taken over. The spark that had once defined their relationship had faded, leaving behind a dull ache of discontent for Michael. Despite his success, he felt trapped in a life that no longer thrilled him. His days were a blur of meetings and business deals, and his evenings were spent in the silence of a home that no longer felt like a sanctuary. Emily, on the other hand, was unaware of the growing chasm between them. She was too focused on keeping the household running smoothly, convinced that maintaining a perfect home and family was enough to keep their marriage alive. Michael's restlessness grew with each passing day. He began staying late at work, finding solace in the quiet of his office, away from the pressures of home. Emily noticed his distance, but attributed it to the stress of his demanding job. She tried to engage him in conversation, suggesting vacations or date nights, but her efforts were met with indifference. The more she tried to connect with him, the more he seemed to pull away, leaving her feeling isolated and insecure. Despite her growing concerns, Emily continued to put on a brave face, believing that things would eventually return to normal. She focused on her children, her friends, and her home, all the while ignoring the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. The illusion of their perfect life was beginning to crack, but Emily was determined to hold it together, unaware that the source of her husband's discontent was not just his work, but something far more personal and devastating. This was the perfect illusion, the outward appearance of happiness masking the deepening void within their marriage. Little did Emily know that the person who would shatter this illusion was someone she trusted implicitly. The betrayal that was about to unfold would not only destroy her marriage, but also tear apart the very foundation of her family. As Emily struggled to hold on to her marriage, another relationship within the family began to develop, one that was both unexpected and dangerous. Margaret, Emily's mother, had recently moved closer to the Thompsons after the death of her husband. At 52, Margaret was a woman of elegance and sophistication, having always maintained a certain air of confidence and poise. She had a complicated relationship with her daughter, often feeling overshadowed by Emily's youth and the seemingly perfect life she had built. But after her husband's passing, Margaret found herself lonely and vulnerable, seeking comfort wherever she could find it. Margaret and Michael's relationship began innocently enough. They had always gotten along well, with Margaret often praising Michael for his accomplishments and the way he provided for his family. After her husband's death, Margaret leaned on Michael for support, finding solace in their conversations. Michael, feeling increasingly disconnected from Emily, found an unexpected confidant in Margaret. She understood his frustrations and offered him the validation he craved. Over time, their conversations became more frequent and more personal. What began as simple exchanges about life and business evolved into deeper, more intimate discussions. They would meet for coffee or lunch, often without Emily's knowledge, under the guise of discussing family matters. As their bond grew stronger, Michael found himself drawn to Margaret in a way he hadn't anticipated. She was different from Emily, more experienced, more understanding, and less demanding. Margaret, for her part, felt flattered by the attention Michael gave her. She hadn't felt desired in years, and the feelings that stirred within her were both thrilling and dangerous. The line between what was appropriate and what was not began to blur. One evening, after a family gathering, Margaret and Michael found themselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after the guests had left. The atmosphere was relaxed, and after a few glasses of wine, they began to talk about their respective frustrations and desires. The conversation grew more intimate, the tension between them palpable. Without fully realizing what was happening, they crossed a line that would change everything. A lingering touch, a stolen glance. Soon they were caught up in a moment that neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a bond over shared grief and loneliness, Michael's behavior became erratic. He would disappear for hours, offering vague excuses that only heightened Emily's suspicions. When he was home, he was distant, often lost in thought or absorbed in his phone. Emily, who had always trusted her husband implicitly, began to feel a growing sense of unease. The man she had loved and married seemed to be slipping away, and she couldn't understand why. She tried to dismiss her fears, attributing his behavior to stress or work, but the nagging feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave her. Desperate for answers, Emily confided in her best friend, Sarah. The two women had been close for years, and Emily felt that Sarah would offer her the support and guidance she needed. "I don't know what's happening, Sarah," Emily said one afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet corner of their favorite cafe. "Michael has been so distant lately. He's always working late, and when he's home, it's like he's not really here. I'm starting to think there's something he's not telling me." Sarah listened carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each word. "Emily, I think you need to talk to him," she suggested. "You deserve to know what's going on. If something is bothering him, you need to get it out in the open." Emily nodded, though the thought of confronting Michael filled her with dread. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear the truth, whatever it might be, but she knew she couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty. That evening, she decided to have a serious conversation with Michael, hoping that they could finally address the growing distance between them. But fate intervened before she could act. The very next day, Emily returned home, unexpectedly early, from a visit to her sister's house. As she entered the house, she was greeted by an eerie silence. Assuming Michael was still at work, she made her way upstairs, only to hear muffled voices coming from the bedroom. Her heart raced as she approached the door, her mind racing with possibilities. What she found when she opened the door shattered her world. There, in the bedroom they shared, were Michael and Margaret, caught in a moment of undeniable intimacy. The scene was like a nightmare. Her husband and her mother, the two people she trusted most, betraying her in the most devastating way possible. Emily's shock quickly turned to anger, and she let out a scream that echoed through the house. Michael and Margaret sprang apart, their faces pale with guilt and fear. They had been discovered, and the illusion they had worked so hard to maintain was destroyed in an instant. The aftermath of that fateful day was nothing short of catastrophic. Emily's world had been turned upside down, and the betrayal she had uncovered left her reeling. The two people she loved and trusted most had shattered her heart, and she didn't know if she could ever recover. The days that followed were filled with tears, anger, and endless questions. How could this have happened? How long had they been deceiving her? Emily felt as though the foundation of her life had been ripped away, leaving her standing on shaky ground. Margaret, consumed by guilt and shame, retreated into herself. She knew that what she had done was unforgivable, and the consequences of her actions were now painfully clear. She tried to reach out to Emily, to explain, to apologize, but her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. The relationship that had already been strained was now irreparably damaged. Margaret, who had lost her husband not long ago, now faced the prospect of losing her daughter as well. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and she found herself sinking into a deep depression, withdrawing from the world and isolating herself from everyone she had once cared about. Michael, on the other hand, was left to face the fallout of his actions. He had destroyed the trust and love that Emily had given him, and the life they had built together was in ruins. He moved out of their home, taking only the bare essentials, and found himself alone in a small, impersonal apartment. The silence of his new life was deafening, and he was forced to confront the reality of what he had done. He had lost everything: his wife, his family, and the respect of the woman he had once admired. The thrill of the affair was long gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing regret. As the days turned into weeks, Emily struggled to find a way forward. She threw herself into her work and her children, trying to distract herself from the pain. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the hurt was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The memories of her life with Michael haunted her, and the betrayal she had suffered left deep scars that would take a long time to heal. She contemplated divorce, knowing that she could never trust Michael again, but the thought of breaking up her family was almost too much to bear. Emily sought solace in therapy, hoping to find some clarity and peace. Her therapist encouraged her to focus on herself, to take the time she needed to heal, and to not rush into any decisions. Emily knew that she needed to put herself first, for the sake of her own well-being and for her children. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. One step at a time, she reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and started to rediscover the person she had been before her life had been consumed by betrayal and heartache. Margaret, meanwhile, continued to spiral downward. The guilt she felt was overwhelming, and she struggled to find a way to atone for her actions. She reached out to Emily time and again, hoping for a chance to make things right. But Emily's forgiveness was not easily won. Margaret knew that she might never be able to repair the damage she had done, and the thought of losing her daughter forever was a burden she could barely carry. She sought comfort in her faith, turning to prayer and reflection, in the hopes of finding some semblance of peace. In the months that followed, the Thompsons' lives changed irrevocably. Emily, though still hurt and angry, began to find a new sense of strength and independence. She realized that she didn't need to be defined by her marriage or by the betrayal she had suffered. She was her own person, capable of building a life that was fulfilling and meaningful. Even without Michael, she decided to pursue a new career, one that would allow her to channel her pain into something productive. With the support of her friends and therapist, she started to see a future for herself that wasn't tied to the past. Michael, too, was forced to come to terms with the choices he had made. He sought therapy of his own, trying to understand why he had thrown away the life he had built with Emily. The process was painful, forcing him to confront the deepest parts of himself and the motivations behind his actions. He realized that his dissatisfaction had been more about his own insecurities than anything wrong with his marriage. But the damage was done, and he knew that he might never be able to repair the trust he had broken. Margaret's journey was perhaps the most difficult of all. The loss of her relationship with Emily weighed heavily on her, and she struggled to find a way to move forward. She continued to reach out to Emily, hoping for reconciliation, but the road to forgiveness was long and uncertain. Margaret knew that she had a lot of work to do, not just in rebuilding her relationship with her daughter, but in coming to terms with the choices she had made and the person she had become. In the end, the Thompsons' story is one of betrayal, loss, and ultimately, the search for redemption. The wounds they inflicted on each other were deep, but with time, they began to heal. Emily learned that she was stronger than she had ever known, capable of standing on her own and creating a life that was truly hers. Michael learned the hard way that actions have consequences, and that the thrill of the moment is never worth the pain it can cause. Margaret, too, learned that forgiveness is a journey, one that requires patience, humility, and a willingness to change. Though their lives would never be the same, the Thompsons found a way to move forward, each in their own way. They were no longer the perfect family they had once appeared to be, but they were wiser, stronger, and more resilient than before. And in the end, they discovered that even in the face of betrayal, there is always a path to healing, if one is willing to walk it. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.